Republicans running for president debate, former President Trump back in court, and the current president takes a hit in the polls. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. With the U.S. presidential election now less than a year away, the race for the White House is ramping up. Republicans hoping to replace President Biden faced off during a lively debate in Miami on Wednesday night. But the frontrunner, Donald Trump, who was back in court again this week, did not take part. Meanwhile, President Biden continues to struggle in the polls. We begin right now with this report from Nitza Soledad Perez in Miami.
5 Republican U.S. presidential candidates faced off last night in Miami, seeking to dethrone former President Trump from his commanding lead for his party's nomination to run for the White House next year. Foreign policy issues dominated the first hour. Ukraine, China, the Israel-Hamas conflict front and center. Trump's rivals all pledged support to Israel, criticizing President Biden for his crisis response.
So what I would tell Bibi is that Israel has the right and the responsibility to defend itself. I would tell him to smoke those terrorists on his southern border, and then I'll tell him as President of the United States, I'll be smoking the terrorists on our southern border.
We need to be clear-eyed. The last thing we need to do is to tell Israel what to do. The only thing we should be doing is supporting them and eliminating Hamas.
The night became a contest between Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, once considered the most powerful challenger to Donald Trump, and former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley, a rising star in the latest polls. Joining them on stage, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, biotech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, and South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. On the domestic front, candidates discussed Social Security, immigration, and how the abortion issue powered Democrats in both the midterms and the election held just this week. Voters in Ohio, considered a Republican state, approved a constitutional amendment to protect abortion rights.
I think there's something deeper going on in the Republican Party here, and I am upset about what happened last night. We've become a party of losers.
We need a 15-week federal limit. This is an issue that should be decided in each state.
So no Republican president can ban abortions any more than a Democrat president can ban these state laws. So let's find consensus.
Personal attacks also created the most viral moments. Ramaswamy attacked Haley during a discussion on whether the widely popular Chinese social media app TikTok should be banned.
In the last debate, she made fun of me for actually joining TikTok while her own daughter was actually using the app for a long time. So you might want to take care of your family first.
Leave my daughter out of your voice.
Your adult daughter. The next generation of Americans are using it. And that's actually the point. You have her supporters propping her up. That's fine. Here's the truth.
You're just
the easy answer.
Instead of debating, the Republican frontrunner hosted a massive rally nearby in a GOP bastion in Hialeah, Florida.
And you have about, what, 7 or 8 candidates left? I think they're at a debate tonight. Nobody's talking about it. Everybody's watching. So it's 61% for your favorite president, me.
Trump's political gamble of skipping these debates has yet to cost him any support. A 4th Republican debate has already been scheduled for December 6 in Alabama. Now, candidates must meet a higher polling and fundraising threshold in order to participate. But one politician must certain to be absent again, Donald Trump. Nitza Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
Time now to hear from our panel. Joining me in Washington, D.C. is Adolfo Franco. He is an attorney and Republican strategist. Also with us is Eleanor Clift. She is a political columnist with the Daily Beast. And joining the discussion from Atlanta is Bill Crane. He is a political analyst and columnist. Welcome to all of you to the show. Adolfo, so we had that Republican debate, this one taking place in Miami. But of course, as we just heard, the frontrunner by a long way, Donald Trump, well, he was not there. So are these debates making any difference at all?
Well, they're not. They're making a difference in this regard. With every debate, Donald Trump's strength is just more evident. He continues to grow stronger after each debate. So the debates are helping Donald Trump. He was absolutely right. The only news yesterday was in Hialeah, where Governor Sanders, support of Arkansas, endorsed President Trump. So these debates are absolutely diminishing the candidates. They are not going to be, any of them are going to be the vice presidential choice of Donald Trump, who is the likely nominee. Now, that said, again, it's still a year away, obviously the election, but the season is just about to begin in 2 months in Iowa. And of course, the nomination doesn't take place until the summer. So if something were to happen, it would be Donald Trump's to lose. He would have to implode. Something would have to happen, and anything can happen in life. And then there would be an opportunity for one of these candidates that have been campaigning to pick up the mantle. But the idea at this juncture, and of course you have great guests on here, then someone can wrestle away the nomination from Donald Trump on the merits is highly unlikely. And that's because they agree with Donald Trump's policies, and Donald Trump is seen as a victim by most Republicans. He's being persecuted by the Democrats. So he has everything going in his favor. And I don't see that strategy changing, and his strength, as demonstrated by recent polls, we'll speak about in a moment, against Joe Biden, just making him more likely. The last point I'll make quickly is, remember, this was supposed to be an issue of electability, that Donald Trump could not be elected. That's what these candidates announced when they first announced that he just couldn't win. The latest polls from CNN and New York Times demonstrate a very different picture.
Okay, Eleanor, of course, as we just saw in that report, there were some very heated exchanges between the former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley and the entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. But Haley is on the rise in the polls, and one of the distinctions we should make is that those polls that show Donald Trump far ahead are national polls, and we know that the primaries are a state-by-state affair. Can someone like Haley still make a breakthrough?
I think the only person who can take Donald Trump out of the running is Donald Trump himself. If he has so many court appearances that the voters begin to think that he would not be able to serve as president. And in the polling that was done by the New York Times over the weekend, if you ask the question if Donald Trump were convicted of a felony account or accounts, would you still vote for him? And the 6% of Republican voters in 6 swing states changed their mind, and that was enough in a tight election to give those 5 of those 6 swing states to Joe Biden in this hypothetical matchup. So what happens to Donald Trump in his multiple court cases could have an impact, and the others are staying in because if something does take Trump out of the race, there are delegates to be collected, and somebody could go to the convention with those delegates. And the voting hasn't started yet. January 15 is the Iowa caucuses, and then which Trump apparently has a lock on, and then New Hampshire is a little bit up in the air, and Governor Christie is talking about taking it all the way to the convention because you have potentially these unsettled court cases. Then you could have verdicts coming down after Trump has become the nominee, and you could even imagine an uprising at the convention. So Donald Trump is overwhelmingly now likely to be the nominee, but there's this stuff that can happen, and having all these candidates standing by is a good idea for the party and the country.
Bill Crane, what about the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis? I mean, he was being touted as a leader at one point, but he hasn't been doing well in the polls. I mean, does he have national appeal?
Well, with respect to my fellow panelists, and you've already pointed out, we're looking at national polls, which largely are based upon name ID. Joe Biden is a weak nominee for the Democrats. Donald Trump is facing 91 felony counts in 6 different legal environments, state and federal. Just in the case of the Georgia case, which I'm a little bit more familiar with as I sit here, 19 counts, and the trial is scheduled to begin the day before Super Tuesday. So to me, there is still a path for Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, Nikki Haley, the former United Nations ambassador and former governor of South Carolina, to continue to build financial support in numbers. Ms. Clift mentioned Iowa. 8 years ago, Donald Trump did not win the Iowa caucuses. He doesn't have a ground operation there now. He does convey and does have, as witnessed by some events he's had there, a healthy not majority, but plurality of Republican voters. But a plurality of Republican voters doesn't win you necessarily the nomination and does not win the White House. So I agree that Joe Biden, each week, with things that happen and pronouncements and decisions made, swing voters are looking for another option. I don't believe a convicted felon will win a nomination for the Republican or the Democratic Party. And I don't see with a couple of these cases, the RICO case in particular in Georgia, how Donald Trump escapes that.
Okay, now joining us is Joseph Williams. He is a former senior editor for U.S. News and World Report. Joseph, great to have you with us. You know, Eleanor, Joseph mentioned a moment ago the multiple felony charges that Donald Trump is facing right now. In fact, he testified in a New York courtroom this week in the civil fraud case. But despite all those multiple legal challenges that the former president is facing, there was a piece in Politico magazine by the conservative columnist Rich Lowry, and the headline on that piece was, "What if Trump is convicted and nobody cares?" The question is, are Democrats relying too much on Trump's legal problems to defeat him?
That depends on who you ask. I mean, I think that it's really highly unusual for somebody who's facing as many criminal trials and as much legal jeopardy as Donald Trump is to still be leading in the polls. But again, as was said earlier, it's still fairly early. I mean, a year in politics is a lifetime and no time at all. So I think there's plenty of time for Democrats to coalesce around a strategy. And certainly if you look at the results from from Tuesday night, there are vulnerabilities in the Republican Party writ large, abortion among them. So it's not necessarily that Democrats are relying on Trump to get convicted. It's just that they haven't had an opportunity or have wanted to show their cards right yet. So I think as there's a path for the also-rans in the Republican debate from last night, there's also an opportunity for Biden to continue and gain strength over time, not just necessarily right now. There's a lot can happen between now and then. Anybody who says they know what's going to happen between now and then is not cognizant of how politics works. So I think there's a lot of variables at play here, and that includes what the Democrats' actual strategy is going to be going into 2024.
Right. Joseph, as you point out, Donald Trump is leading in the polls, as we just saw in those last two polls over the past weekend, despite the fact that he's facing all these legal problems. Does that also tell us that the voting public, the electorate, are not buying these legal cases against him, that they're seeing it as a political challenge?
I think, again, what Donald Trump has done very successfully is frame the narrative around his trial, but a lot of people who are actually believing that narrative are people who are true believers to begin with. I think that, again, I'm going to mention again that a year is a lifetime and no time, that polls are a snapshot in time, and that what Donald Trump has done is frame it in such a way that he has become a victim. So I think that the public is paying attention. I think that two words that also will come into play are swing voters. Right. Again, we don't know how they're going to feel about this. And I think it was mentioned earlier, a lot of times polls this early out depends largely on name recognition, which Donald Trump has in droves. So I think it's too early to tell, but time is wasted.
Adolfo, there's another thing that the polls are showing us, and that is that there are a large number of voters across America who don't want either Donald Trump or Joe Biden to be running in the election. They don't want to see a rematch of 2020. And of course, lots of, as we've just heard, can change in the coming months. But, you know, that's the choice that Americans are confronted with. And despite the fact that he's facing all these legal problems, can Donald Trump, in fact, win?
Yes, of course. And every indication is he is going to win. Let me clarify a few things that have been said on this program. First of all, those are not national polls. The New York Times did polls of 6 swing states where Donald Trump is leading in 5. Those are not national. Those are the swing states. Those are the states that are in play, or key states that are in play. And so those are not national polls. Yes, he's ahead in the national polls, and he's ahead in the state polls that matter. And those are the swing states. That's the first thing. Secondly, what is evident in your questions here in the discussion is, with all due respect to the three other guests that I venture do not support President Trump, is that the American people see this for what it is. It's a weaponization and a persecution. And that's why this isn't sticking. As one of the guests said, a convicted felon. You already see people have him as a convicted felon. He hasn't even had the trial. And he's being convicted, and certainly in the commentary. As you remember on this program, when Nathan King first reported, remember that long ago Bragg indictment that nobody talks about anymore because it was so bogus? That was such a big position in this big story in this program when he held up historic surrender and so forth. Everyone thought it was the end of Donald Trump just with that announcement. And what's happened since then is his political strength has only weakened. But what we don't talk about very much on this program is Joe Biden. Yes, Joseph, a year is a long time in politics. A week is, I understand that. But 3 years is also important. The 3 years of this administration have shown Joe Biden consistently losing support. He becomes increasingly unpopular. So the fact is, this is a president that has not been having swings. He's been in a downward trend, certainly since Afghanistan. He has, unfortunately, the Jimmy Carter syndrome. It's starting to gel with the American people. The malaise, the people just don't feel. 76% of Americans, independents and Democrats, think the country's moving in the wrong direction. Who is leading the country? It's not Donald Trump. When he led it, we never had those numbers. So I guess the question is going to be posed, are you better off than you were 4 years ago economically and in terms of the world? And I think the answer is pretty clear for most Americans, including independents, not just Republicans.
Right. Eleanor, Joe Biden is touting his economic agenda, his economic performance, but it doesn't seem to be selling in any big way with voters. I mean, are there alarm bells ringing now among Democrats?
Well, first of all, if you ask the question, are you better off today than 4 years ago? I think 4 years ago, under the Trump presidency, we had a president who wasn't able to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, and the economy was failing. Second of all, when I talked about the polls, I talked about the 5 or 6 swing states, and it's in those states where the numbers turn around if the voters are asked if they would vote for a convicted felon. So nobody's already convicted him. This was a hypothetical question in a poll. Now, Biden has had some rough numbers in this recent poll, which was taken really at the height of the Israeli-Hamas conflict. And the erosion that he's seeing is mainly among young people and among brown and black young people who are taking the side of the Palestinians. And it's a very emotional debate. And the New York Times points out in its analysis of its own poll that this is the generation that was born after 9/11. They have only known an Israel with a far-right government, and they are not accustomed to the kind of Middle East conflicts that have been fairly routine as their elders have watched what's going on, and they don't see Israel as an underdog. Now, this is a political situation. It's going to look very different a year from now, and it's a very tricky situation. And I think Biden is handling a lot of crises at the same time and doing very well. And objectively, the economy is doing well. Inflation remains a problem. There's not a whole lot he can do about that. But he's selling himself in isolation is not how you win a presidential contest. And I think once this contest engages and people see the contrast between Biden and Trump. Right now, Trump is running around the country campaigning on an evil justice system that's out to get him, and he's not addressing any of the problems facing the American people. It's all about him, and he's acting like he's an incumbent president running for re-election, and he has no responsibility for anything that's going on in the world except this judicial system that's after him. And his allies are, their Project 25 is basically about taking the Department of Justice, if there is a second Trump administration, and weaponizing it so he can get retribution against people like his former attorney general, et cetera, et cetera. This race has not been engaged yet at all. And when people express their dissatisfaction with whatever, the economy, with the climate, with war, who do they blame? They blame the president. It's always thus. And I think, once this becomes a contest with two real people facing off against each other, things will look very different.
Okay. Bill Crane, I mean, there are also issues in the Biden camp. There's an advisor to former President Barack Obama, actually, David Axelrod. You will remember him, of course, from the Obama administration. He posted something on social media in which he said that Joe Biden should consider whether to stay in the 2024 race. Of course, there was some pushback on that, and he said afterwards that his post was not actually calling for Biden to step down. But it doesn't look very good, does it?
Anand, David Axelrod's a very bright guy, and he doesn't say things like that without checking in first with Barack Obama, who can be largely credited or blamed with Joe Biden being in the White House. He was very instrumental behind the scenes in getting a number of Democrats to bow out and endorse Joe Biden 4 years ago, including Bernie Sanders, who were planning to go all the way to the convention. Joe Biden's had a troubled presidency. Eleanor Clift is right. There are some things that are going well, but whether we want to talk about the up and down of the economy, some of the handling of Afghanistan, our troops that are sitting there waiting to be shot like sitting ducks right now, that are helping out in Israel, helping out in the Ukraine. There are any number of legal challenges facing the president's son that may spread into the rest of the Biden family. The American people deserve a better choice than the rematch of 2020. And I am not a partisan. With one of our guests who are respectfully, it's not my job to be here in favor of Joe Biden or in favor of Donald Trump. Analysis about telling your viewers what's at hand, what the trends are, what the data shows. And as we know, voters don't swing in large measure one way or the other. They move incrementally. So you look at patterns of prior elections, prior states, and Donald Trump in many ways has broken the mold. There's not been a president who's faced this many criminal proceedings in the past. There's not been a president who's, as Eleanor said, run as an incumbent who's out of office. It's a very unusual model to try to forecast.
Right. Joseph, Bill brought up the point just a moment ago that what David Axelrod said could possibly be a reflection of the thinking of the former President Barack Obama. Do you think that is the case?
We will never know. And it's hard to guesstimate that kind of a conversation, mainly because it is so heated. And Joe Biden was Barack Obama's right-hand man. And keep in mind that Barack Obama did not clear the field for Joe Biden in 2016. He cleared the field for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and we all know how that ended. So I think it's really an open-ended question. Is it likely? Possibly. Are we ever going to know for sure? Probably not. Will anybody fess up to it? No, absolutely not. Mainly because you don't want to be seen as the guy putting a knife in the back of the incumbent president of your own party. Now, I do think there are a couple things that bear repeating. I mean, I support Eleanor's position fully that a lot can happen, and that Donald Trump is running essentially in a vacuum. And he has been very good at breaking the mold. He has been very good at framing himself as a victim, even though the facts to a large degree are otherwise. And if you look objectively at this race, there should be no contest, and yet here we are. So I think that there's a long way to go. I think a lot has been said. I don't think we've even begun to see Joe Biden fight. I mean, perhaps we should see him fight a little bit more, but right now that has not been unveiled. It probably won't be until the turn of the year. But I don't think we're going to see the race as static as it is right now. Things are definitely going to change. I think Biden is definitely going to make more of a campaign and try to create more of a contrast. And again, I'm not pro him or not, but I'm just saying this is how politics tend to work. You've got an incumbent president who does actually have a record to run on. You've got an opponent who does have a lot of legal trouble, and that is going to speak to independent and undecided voters, I think, much largely than it does now.
Adolfo, let's turn away from the presidential election to statewide elections, which were held this week. And when we saw these elections from Virginia to Kentucky, there were big wins for the Democrats, particularly on the abortion issue. I mean, could that spell trouble for Republicans in 2024?
Well, you know, there was a very famous movie I think most people have watched called The Graduate. In that movie, they said one word, plastics. If there's one word to take away from Tuesday was abortion. It has been the case. And there's no question the abortion issue is an issue when you have commentators in the conservative press, such as Sean Hannity of Fox, saying that he recognizes he's in the minority in the country. You need to start looking at that issue and presenting it completely differently than what's been presented. I think Nikki Haley at the national level is the first to be doing that. And frankly, President Trump. They've been doing that, signaling a change for the Republican Party. That is absolutely going to be an issue and not a winning issue. And not only that, but that's likely the Ohio ballot in a very conservative state, that's likely to be, those ballots are going to be abortion enshrinement in state constitutions and protections are going to be probably presented in at least 10 or 12 other states, among them states like Arizona, swing states. So that's in Iowa. So those are going to be, it's an issue for that's an Achilles heel for the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. There's no question whether that issue, no pun intended, trumps things like the economy and the other traditional issues. But I take exception. I mean, I know we have a nonpartisan panel here, but I venture to say all three of them vote. And when they vote, I don't just have a sense they're not voting for the Republican candidate for President Donald Trump. Yeah. And I say this for the following reason. More people died of COVID, Eleanor, under President Biden than they did under President Trump. When I say you're better off, if you think you're paying less for gasoline and groceries than you were 4 years ago, vote for President Biden. Unfortunately, the American people don't see it the way the guests here do. They don't see it up and down and inflation improving and the rest of it. They see a very different situation. Now, before, just quickly on this, now the explanation Eleanor is giving is, well, it's Israel. The polling is up. Before, remember, it was Ukraine. That's why he was Ukraine.
All right, Adolfo.
And so forth. So the bottom line on this is, these are excuses. The fact is, this president has failed policies, and most Americans see him.
Okay, Adolfo, I'm running out of time. I've got to go to Eleanor. Eleanor, I've got about a minute left to give you a chance to get the last word in on this.
Well,
I just wanted to point out that every recent former president, at the end of their first term, their reelection was in doubt. Ronald Reagan's reelection was in doubt. Bill Clinton's was in doubt. Barack Obama looked like he was toast, and I remember interviewing Vernon Jordan at the time and saying how it was so important for the first black president to be reelected because it would be a reaffirmation. And he came up with a strategy against Mitt Romney, portraying Romney as this kind of heartless job crusher. So this is not unusual. And let's see what the next set of polls come out.
Okay.
But Democrats are not going to trade in Joe Biden. He's got his flaws. I wish he were younger, but he's not. And he has a lot of positive attributes, including the fact that he beat Donald Trump once, and beating a sitting president is a hard thing to do.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time, but thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.